Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
I was fully aware of the cover-up.
The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and the political fabric of America.
Who does not feel rising alarm when the question in any discussion of foreign policy is no longer should we do something, but do we have the capacity to do anything?
Whether we bring our enemies to justice or bring justice to our enemies, justice will be done.
America's exceptionalism is not because we're smarter, better, or greater than any other people or country. America's exceptional because a group of people came over here and wrote a constitution that gave us a level of freedom that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And that freedom means it comes with a responsibility that we have to participate in our government, participate in and understand what's going on, help others to understand that and teach them, and make sure that that American exceptionalism continues forever.
When I was young, I was like dreaming. When I was dreaming of America, after all those Hollywood films and stuff like that, I was like, okay, this can be a great country to live in. People are just more free to speak. In Turkey, nowadays, you cannot speak about everything. Well, you can do it, but you'll be having the fear of getting arrested or something like that.
You know, America was built on immigration, right? We had great waves of immigration. We had, obviously the first settlers that were trying to escape religious persecution, and they began to build this country. And then we had an immigration of institutions, governments moving in and bringing indentured servants that built America. And then the next wave was via slavery. And slavery was immigration. It was bad and wrong, but can you imagine America today without the slaves in our agrarian society? The South was all the money in the 1800s. The South produced all the money. They had all the cotton, they had all the vegetables and corn and everything else, and it got exported. And that was from the black immigration via slavery. And the next wave was the Irish in the potato famine. And the Irish were instrumental in building out the East Coast, and they became, they were workers that built New York and built the aqueducts and built the canals. And then can you imagine America without the Chinese? No transcontinental railroad. Where would we be?
I think as young people in America, we need to fully understand the fundamentals of how our country was built. And most of my friends haven't. When we are taught the fundamentals of America, and it's all trivial, it's all something that we're going to be checking ABC on a test.
I think if the forefathers that drafted the Constitution could fast forward and stand here today and see what's going on, they'd probably pick up their arms again and start another battle for independence.
I think they would be quite appalled quite honest with you. Our constitutional rights are being trampled on daily. If they're not being trampled on, they're being threatened being trampled on. And the framers didn't intend that.
I think the US Constitution of all written constitutions is probably the best we've ever seen. I mean, I think it is that good. But like all constitutions, and here maybe one looks at the Bible as another example, people read it and interpret it in different ways.
I think they did a fantastic job of writing the Constitution of what, the government could do. But as far as what they couldn't, I think they could have done a little better job at that.
I think you have to be very careful when you start messing, with the fundamentals that the country was founded on. So if someone were going to make changes, it needs to be very well thought out. I would say, in my opinion, it probably needs to be left alone.
We're violating the Constitution. Unfortunately, we're allowing it to happen because we're not active. We're not engaged. We've been sleeping for 25 years. If you look at the Constitution, they built the checks and balances in. They missed a couple of things that nobody would have ever thought that a senator would stay in office for 50 years.
We need to have limited terms. That's a huge start right there.
I think we need better people in politics. I think the caliber of man in public life in the United States has declined in the last 50 years. I mean, look at the U.S. Senate 50 years ago. Look at it today. It's scary.
This is your chance, once in a lifetime chance, to grab control from the special interests, the oligarchs, the lobbyists, the people who've controlled this country for too long, and to return control to the patriotic, loyal citizens of this country.
The Congress and Senate act in the best interest of the American people. No, they do not. They act in the best interest of themselves and their party and the lobbyists, special interest groups. That's it. And that, I think Americans need to wake up and realize that. That we're more divided than ever. And that's how they keep this circus going. They divide Americans, get us bickering, nothing gets done. It's a win for this party, a win for that party, a loss for the American people.
Every elected official is bound by the oath they took to uphold the Constitution. That oath supersedes that delegated duty to do. Because when they utilize that delegated power in a way that violates the Constitution itself, that's not a constitutional wielding and use of that power.
The benefit to the congressmen of catering to special interest groups, they get reelected. And I mean, they're in there forever. They got a secure job. They're getting paid well. What do they care what they do to us? They got a nice paycheck coming. What they do doesn't affect them. We're just little pawns in their game. And so there's no incentive for them to do what's right for us.
I think we're on a decline at a pace that we've never seen before in this country.
If you're making $100 grand a year right now, you're struggling.
You bailed out the crooks on Wall Street, then why don't we bail out the people that were victims to their criminology, which are students as well?
The more government gets involved in our lives, the worse things get.
I think it's not the white picket fence America that we all think it is today.
As far as equality across the board for Americans of any income level or race description or anything else, no, things are absolutely not equal. They will never be equal.
Crime in the inner cities, hundreds and hundreds of deaths a year.
make America great. We're going to change America. I mean, wouldn't that be wonderful if we could really do that?
If you dumb people down and do not educate them on our true histories, then you can basically manipulate them to do anything.
With the Nixon administration in particular and the whole Watergate scandal, it really started to open the public's eyes, in my opinion, to things that go on behind closed doors. If that security guard hadn't been in that place at that particular time, the things that were revealed within our own government, in our own country, we never would have known about.
Watergate was about big themes: the constitutional separation of powers, the protection of individual rights, the function of a free press. The people of the United States were caught up in all this to a degree that might seem unlikely to anyone who didn't experience it. Day after day, week after week, we watched the drama played out in one disclosure after another. It was all on television. And through television, the people became a part of the process of judgment.
The things that have come to light recently with, the CIA and the NSA and how they are, quote unquote, spying on the American people and probably countries around the world, for our own security, but we probably wouldn't know about any of that, so to a degree in that particular situation, you look at individuals like Edward Snowden, or the WikiLeaks guy, Julian Assange, that can be described in a certain degree as criminal. Is it criminal to reveal the truth? If in fact it is the truth. And if it is the truth, why is it being hidden from the greater populace? That's a problem. As we move forward in terms of presidents, and you look at, what presidents accomplish, you look at Bill Clinton. He left us in a situation where the country's never been more in the black.
Barack Obama is the man for this.
We had the largest surplus in the history of our country after his administration. And he probably only had 2 years of an 8-year run because he was dealing with his own scandals, and the next administration chewed through that in a couple of years, got us involved in 2 costly wars. And why? Because defense contractors needed those contracts. They needed to do what they do, which is build weaponry. And then those wars are over, they're left for another administration to deal with, and also a debt, that's inherited and continued to pass on. So I believe that the system is broken, and I believe the powers that be want it to continue to remain because they are the powers that be, and they have their place. So if their place is at the table, if I'm them, I don't want to get up, and I certainly don't want to be replaced. So until someone's willing to address that and confront it head on, this is going to continue.
This idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man.
I'd like to believe in our election process and that it's democratic and everyone's vote has a say, but the way it's structured and the way it's set up and the electorate and the delegates, and it can be very confusing.
Well, the Electoral College was there simply because of the way the Founding Fathers viewed a democracy. They knew that a democracy was self-destructive. The Electoral College was established specifically to prevent that method of electing the most powerful officers in our land to government. Because when a majority is responsible for voting in its own self-interest, then that disservices everyone. What it does is it prevents the people from being properly represented. As the old quote goes, when the public realizes that it can vote itself largest from the public treasury, each generation they will vote themselves more and more money from the public treasury for their own self-benefit. It can't exist for exactly that reason as a democracy. The Founding Fathers knew this. They'd seen democracies crash and burn because of that. So they established the Electoral College to prevent these high offices from being subjected to a popular vote that was voting in its own self-interest.
What is our agenda for even wanting to be the president or wanting to be in politics? Or what is our agenda? What's our motive for it?
Everyone comes with their own agenda, and that's a matter of fact. That's the way it is.
Is it about power and money for them? Absolutely, that's all it's about.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
I believe that the American people didn't want spin and PR from their elected officials. They wanted honesty and straight talk.
Just like a lot of our presidents, they make a lot of promises, they say what we want to hear, they get in office, and they don't make do on those promises.
10 years ago, John McCain offered a bill that said he would ban a candidate from paying registered lobbyists. And he did this because he said that having lobbyists on your campaign was a conflict of interest. This is what he said 10 years ago. Well, I'll tell you that John McCain then would be pretty disappointed with John McCain now, because he hired some of the biggest lobbyists in Washington to run the campaign, and when he was called on it, his top lobbyist actually had the nerve to say, the American people won't care about this.
If lobbyists were removed, then things would start to get done, because now they're going to be accountable to me and you. And that's where it needs to start.
People that control this system from the top down own most of the companies that the media works with or for or through. They can use the media to put whatever agenda and propaganda out there they want. They've been doing it for generations now. They own almost every major news outlet, newspaper, television that you can possibly think of. They sponsor all of the major TV shows, the morning shows, the evening shows, the talk shows. All of that they own. They control the information flow that goes through those venues, all of it. They don't give you the full story when they're reporting. They spin the details that they do give you. They give you the impression of one side of the equation. The old adage of there's two sides to every story is not true of American media today. The only side of the story is the one they want you to have, and the one that fits the agenda that they are now paid to drive. And that agenda is almost always to the far left. Almost always. To say that we have a conservative group in America and a leftist group in America is no longer true. You're basically talking about two doors into the same cattle chute. Okay, one says left, one says right, but behind the scenes they merge into the same tunnel to the slaughterhouse. That's what you're looking at here. Well, let's get into a few of the details about how the grand scam that's being perpetrated on us all came to be. In 1913, on a private island called Jekyll Island, a group of individuals, moneyed individuals, that ran the banks, controlled the government, and controlled the economy through those banks, came together to create a centralized banking system that would allow them to transfer the wealth of every American into their hands. The economic corruption in America that we have to deal with is based upon the transfer of private wealth from individual Americans into the hands of an elite few via means of the Federal Reserves and other parts of the banking system, all controlled and manipulated by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is itself not federal. It has nothing to do with the government. It's an entirely private banking system. run by one major group of entities that control everything about those banks. Our interest rates are set through those banks and manipulated by those banks. Whenever they want to cause a depression or they want to cause an abundance, they can either increase or decrease the available money to the system just by either printing more or burning more electronically, because there's hardly any physical money anymore as far as that goes. The Fed has been given the exclusive right to create money out of thin air. The major part of the corruption is when you're told that you're being loaned money to purchase something, but that money doesn't exist, literally. It comes into existence solely because someone enters digits into a computer. So what you have is these banks creating wealth from nothing and then using the impression that that wealth is real to make these loans to people for property who then can't pay them or don't pay them. And the bank then uses the nothing they created to seize control of a real asset and transfer it to their own pockets. It's how the system's designed to work. The Fed has never been audited in its entire existence. If it's a government entity, why can't it be audited? Why hasn't it been audited? Because it's not. It's entirely private. They've bought and paid for the politicians to ensure that the laws cannot get passed to make them accountable to the public, as even a contractor for that matter. They do what they do for their own self-interest to the detriment of the rest of us.
The general population no longer, in my opinion, has hope that they can accomplish anything. They're either being taxed or regulated or penalized at every turn for every achievement or accomplishment they engage in.
I would have been more than happy to pay more taxes if I knew that it was really going to go to places and situations that really benefit others. But it doesn't.
If there was a single principle that I could impart to all 330 million Americans about the income tax, it is that it absolutely, positively does not operate the way the government tells you that it does. And the government is engaged in the largest financial crime in the history of the world, and the American people are the victims.
We are going to put an end to the notion that the American taxpayer exists to fund the federal government. The federal government exists to serve the American people.
I've been looking at this for 20 years, this subject, and understanding that the income tax does not operate the way the government claims it does. It does not operate upon the American people the way the government claims it does. We have millions, hundreds of millions of Americans who fill out a W-4 every year, and not one of them is required to do so if they're operating in the private sector and they're an American citizen or a legal resident for that matter. But they sign these forms, and of course on the form it says their name, it's got their social security number, and they might take some exemptions on the form. And they believe when they sign under penalty of perjury that they're signing that those three elements are factual and that they haven't lied about their name or their number. And of course that's part of it. But what they don't understand is when they sign that form, they're not merely attesting under penalty of perjury to those facts, they are also attesting under penalty of perjury that they are a person required under law to sign a W-4. And that constitutes documentary evidence to the IRS, when in fact, under tax law, he never owed a penny. If we go all the way back to 1916 and the Bruce Shaber case, even as far back as that time, Justice White talked about the distinction between what the law says and how the law is enforced. And he drew a distinction all the way back then that it was very, very possible and indeed likely that the government could write the tax law to say one thing and enforce it in a completely different manner. And he's turned out to be a fortune teller because that is exactly what the United States government has been doing. The written law says one thing, but it's so complex, 99.9% of the American people wouldn't even try to figure it out. So the government takes advantage of that by enforcing the tax in a way other than the tax is written.
Politicians, all talk, no action, nothing's going to get done.
We're in dire straits. I think that people are really suffering, and there's a lot of inequality and discrimination that's going on. And I think that there's just the distribution of wealth is really creating a lot of problems.
You need to get out of your armchair, stop watching the sports, learn what's going on with your country and your public servants, who are now your public servants that hide under your bed to bite you when you least suspect it. If you don't step up, we're gone. End of story.
The government was taking more of our money, more of our options, and more of our freedom. I went into politics in part to put up my hand and say, stop.
In the 1890s, the economy in the United States was really heating up. And as we moved into the 20th century, the people that constituted the Federal Reserve decided that the economy was already doing great. The American people were already doing great, but they wanted to get theirs. So that's when they came up with hatching the plot for the Federal Reserve, which is the core rot. It is the grand scam when it comes to depriving Americans of proper self-governance and liberty.
How do these people come to the conclusion that they can spend what they don't have? They're telling us that we have a currency called the dollar, printed on paper by an organization called the Federal Reserve that can print it on demand. Hence, we have what is now, and been for a long time, fractional reserve banking, where these systems allow the money to be printed up and used and disseminated to all these individual banks that are part of this one whole bank. And through that, they can create as much money as they want simply by typing any number into a computer screen they want to. But there's nothing behind that. There's nothing behind any of that. So how did the world get trillions of dollars in debt when there were never trillions of dollars to loan? It was all numbers on a computer screen created by people, not by natural resources, not by precious metals, but by people. And through this system, they have been able to take your home, destroy your education, destroy your economy, destroy your ability to retire, to save, to produce, to do anything. And the system is on the verge of complete and total collapse. Despite what they want you to believe, there is no presidential candidate that's going to save you from that.
The Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air for the United States government on demand. And then they want interest back on the money they created out of thin air. But of course, they don't want more money created out of thin air. They want money that has value. Well, how do they achieve that? What they do is they put money into circulation. Let me give you an example of how this is done. A pallet of $100 bills that equals $1 million costs the United States government $1,230 to make. As soon as they put it on the floor of a Federal Reserve Bank, it goes from $1,230 in paper and ink to $1 million in currency. They then spread that out into the population. Once people use it to purchase goods or labor, and goods actually represents labor, then that paper and ink attains value. Once it attains value, it becomes what the Federal Reserve wants back, because when it's paper and ink, it's meaningless. Once we, the American people, through the sweat of our brow, give it value, then they want their interest. They want to take the money off the top that they get back that actually has some value now. And that is the sole purpose of the income tax. That's why it was passed at exactly the same time as the Federal Reserve Act.
The grandest scam ever perpetrated on any people, any nation, is the Federal Reserve.
The modern theory of perpetuation of debt has drenched the earth with blood and crushed its inhabitants under burdens ever accumulating.
Issue of currency should be lodged with the government and be protected from domination by Wall Street. We are opposed to provisions which would place our currency and credit system in private hands.
Despite warnings such as these, Woodrow Wilson signed the 1913 Federal Reserve Act.
I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion. No longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. The Federal Reserve is the grandest scam ever perpetrated against a nation or its people. It is a mechanism of transfer of wealth. It is unconstitutional delegation of authority to print and control the issuance of money. It is unmitigated in the way that it allows control of our society, the way that we buy and sell, the way that we establish credit or pay off that credit. It is used to mold our society into a slave market for the bankers. It's an unconstitutional delegation of power to create money. It is a control mechanism of our society, of our property, of individual rights, of everything to do with the way that we live our lives. The grandest scam of all is the theft of America through a pretend money system, a fiat money system that benefits only the private interest of the bankers.
Congress, the Senate, anybody in politics right now, I don't have any use for any of them. Again, back to what I said earlier, they're all on the same team. They're politicians. As far as I'm concerned, from what I've seen, they're run by the lobbyists that live in DC. They have too many favors to pay back. They're planning for their retirement so that when they're not in office, the favors that they've done for company X, Y, or Z, you can bet they're going to be hired on and have a great executive position with that company later on. There's people behind the curtain with the money that guide them, and they're nothing more than puppets on a string. They've set themselves up with a good program at the expense of everybody else. We fund these guys, we pay their check, and the citizens now seem to have this understanding that they control us in anything they say or do. We can't do anything about it. People have to remember, we write their check. So who do they work for? They work for me and they work for you. And they're screwing the bosses right now. That's us.
United States of America is a great place to live. I'm totally sure about it. But something missing here. The sense of the culture is missing here. People need to be more integrated, more into it, because this is the only world we have. And if we just fail to live in this one, we will not have any other place to live in.
We were taught very directly what it means to be an American. And we absorbed almost in the air a love of country and an appreciation of its institutions. If you didn't get these things from your family, you got them from the neighborhood, from the father down the street who fought in Korea, or the family who lost someone at Anzio. Or you could get a sense of patriotism from school. And if all else failed, you could get a sense of patriotism from the popular culture. We've got to do a better job of getting across that America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.
I want the people of America to notice about people who have disabilities, who have diseases. You know, they need more health care. Not only that, but we need to stop fighting. We just need to stop fighting with other nations, just attacking each other. I mean, what good is that going to get you? Nothing much.
People are equal. It doesn't matter if you're Hispanic, Latino, Black, it doesn't really matter. We all need to be kind of in unity, and to single someone out and feel pity towards a certain race is kind of, in my opinion, a little absurd, because we are all a human race. I know there's different ethnicities within the human race, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty, we're all together, and that's what the world is supposed to be about unity and living for a greater good besides yourself.
And I think it all starts with the individual. You know, if a person believes that we're going to have a greater country, then we're going to have a greater country, you know. But there's no hopefulness right now, you know. People are kind of self-absorbed in their own technological world and whatever we're told to believe in. And I think that needs to change.
I just want America to change so that I have a chance to grow up, and everyone in my generation has a chance to grow up, so we get a beautiful world. America needs to change. It just needs to change to make life better for everyone.